after the meeting in the days to come. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our first Minnesota Learning Commons meeting here of this brand new academic year. My name is Stephen Kelly. I work here at the Minnesota State System Office in sunny St. Paul, Wells Fargo Place building. And maybe we can start today by just doing some introductions. We have popcorn updates. And so if I remember correctly, Mary, Bob, we separate those two things out, right? We start with our introductions, and then we're going to move on to the updates from the different organizations that they can make. So how about we do this? We will go ahead and we can start by introducing ourselves and then forecast the next person that we're going to ask to popcorn in. And Jeff, I remember you were like an expert at this last year. So I think I'm going to start by passing over the next introduction to Jeff Plumman and have him introduce himself.
Yeah, sure. And here's my secret. I popped open the participant list, and much like in baseball, I would let people know who was on deck. So I'm Jeff Plumman. I'm the online and digital learning specialist. Dave Blanchard, you are on deck actually, but I wanted to let you know that. I am the online and digital learning specialist at the Department of Ed. I work with our online schools. I work with digital learning, and most recently, you know, all of the pandemic guidance and questions and answers around like the digital learning that has gone on there. And I'm going to popcorn over to Dave Blanchard.
Hey everybody, I'm Dave Blanchard, and I am the newest member here, I believe. So Mary, thanks for extending that invite. I'm the interim director of SESU Online and Distance Learning. So I facilitate a team of instructional designers and technologists to support our faculty in course development in better use and stronger use of instructional technologies and general troubleshooting of everything that someone might be like, hey, I need, that ends up coming with us. And then I'm very appreciative to be able to collaborate internally with our education technologies and innovations group, as well as our CEDL group who do other faculty development pieces. I did a terrible job at telling Karen she's on deck, but Karen, you're on deck, and there we go.
Good thing I didn't leave to close my door. I am Karen Qualley. I am currently the interim executive director of library services and online learning. First, that felt like they just gave me two jobs, but I actually really like the cohesion that's happening here. What I'm seeing with that, the online learning team is an instructional design and an instructional support team, not just for distance education, but all modalities. And then I get to step into the beginnings of a strategic visioning process with the library over the next 2 years. And so there's a lot of enthusiasm about where there's some overlap or some convergence of our work, a lot of alignment between IT, instructional design, and the library. So excited for the next 2 years. Oh, yeah, I always forget that. I will always forget if you tell me to assign someone. Mary, you're next.
Thanks, Karen. I'm Mary Messacomer. I am the outreach facilitator with Sourcewell Technology. And I'm also the administrator. I'm so lucky to be the administrator of the Minnesota Learning Commons again for this coming academic year. So thanks very much. And I think I will popcorn over to Dave Vandenboom.
All right, I'm Dave Vandenboom. Currently, I'm principal of one of the K-12 online schools, Northern Star Online, but I'm also here representing MnLC, the Minnesota Online Learning Alliance. And I'll go to
Looks like your choices are Peter or Bob Rubini.
Yeah, Bob.
All right. Bob Rubini from the University of Minnesota Center for Educational Innovation. I think my colleagues are on vacation today, so they couldn't be here. I am the senior leader for online learning at the University of Minnesota, or actually I should say senior specialist. let's see, what else? I've been with the Learning Commons for a while, and I'm sort of like one of the historians of it. I think this is a great organization, and really one of the few where we can really share things P through 20. So really excited about some of the plans that we've started talking about for this next year, which we'll be talking about later in the session. And now on to Peter from Fond du Lac.
Hey, good afternoon. I'm Peter Angelos, and I'm at Fond du Lac Tribal and Community College, and it's a member of Minnesota State Colleges and Universities. I'm the CIO here, and I've been really lucky to be associated with the Learning Commons, starting back when I was at the U, and then transitioned as I followed to MnState. And I think that's about it for today. Well, should I say back to you, Steve?
You can certainly pass it back to me, Peter. Well, thanks everyone again for joining and for the introductions. We can move on now to our popcorn updates from the organizations. And I guess maybe, Bob, would you like to get us started? Can I put you on the spot? Give us an update from you.
I will. Pardon me, I'm crunching on carrots here, late lunch. At any rate, couple of interesting things that are going on at the University of Minnesota. One is we have a new vice provost for distributed learning. That's the big one that's happened since we last talked. We have not had someone in that position since about, I think it's 2012. That position was retrenched at that time due to budgetary considerations. Unfortunately, it was right when online learning started to take off. So we've kind of been, we really have been operating without a senior leader in this area for the last 10 years or so. So we're really excited about that. Eric Watkins is the name of the person who's coming into that position on September 12th. And at this point, it looks like definitely Sanenge and I will probably be moving to that new office from the Center for Educational Innovation and reporting to our new vice provost. And I'm not sure of Jeff's plans at this point, but we're pretty excited that we finally have someone named. So that's the first big piece of news. Another thing is that during the summer, the provost asked me to chair a committee that was involved with taking a look at marketing online programs across our system and how we could coordinate the marketing a little bit better. I think we're highly decentralized, as I would imagine Minnesota State is, and the question is, perhaps there have been some gaps, duplication, or perhaps where you might be spending more money or sometimes competing with ourselves if we're not coordinating our marketing efforts a little bit more thoroughly. So that's been a really interesting project. We are hopefully coming out with a report at around middle part of October. So we'll keep you posted on that. Final item is that last week we had a court case come down from Cleveland State University dealing with proctoring. And I happen to be the business owner for our proctoring in the University of Minnesota system. So that's kept me pretty busy. I just talked to our Office of the General Counsel a couple days ago, who said we don't have to do anything immediately because this is in a different district from the Minnesota district. This is the eastern part of Ohio, but definitely saying that we're watching very closely. The ruling itself had to do with the room scans, where the students are supposed to do this kind of thing and show what's happening in their environment. And what was a little bit novel about this one is they used a Fourth Amendment justification against, unreasonable search. And that was one that the judge in that case seems to have accepted. So that's a pretty interesting development that probably affects any of you who are using proctoring or might in the future. So that's it for me. Feel free to call on someone else now.
Thanks so much, Bob. I just want to recognize Alyssa hopped into the room with us here. Welcome today, Alyssa. We just previously did some brief introductions. Could I invite you to briefly introduce yourself to the group today? Looks like your microphone is currently muted.
Hi, yes. I'm Elisa Raff. I'm the Executive Director of Minnesota Online High School. Today, we're welcoming back new and returning students, so I was running late because there are just too many things going on. So nice to be here and sorry I have missed the first 15 minutes.
We're just so happy you could join us, Elisa. Welcome. Jeff, can I pass the microphone over to you to give us an update from the Minnesota Department of Ed?
Yeah, sure, why not? So I will follow kind of Bob's pattern here, actually. We have had some transitions in kind of the section where I work. So Sally Reynolds, who you will know was my supervisor and was my other member who attended the coordinating committee and sat on the executive planning committee for the MnLC, has transitioned and replaced Paula Palmer as director of our division. So sad to see Paula go, but super happy that Sally Reynolds is stepping into that position as the director of the Career and College Success Division. So if you're not keeping score at home, the Career and College Success Division not only contains online learning, but it also contains dual credit, PSEO, AP and IB, Minnesota Career Information Systems, all of CTE, and all of adult basic education. So we're kind of an interesting mix of folks, but I say we are a formidable team that is well aligned with the topic that we're going to discuss today. About kind of moving toward looking at the whole learner and a lifetime of sort of a less linear pathway than we maybe considered it. So super excited about that. The other thing I will say specifically about online education is that we welcomed more than 20, I think 23 is going to be the number of state-approved online learning providers to the list. That puts us at a total of 88 schools in K through 12. When I started, there were 24. And so the growth and interest in online education continues in our state. Preliminary enrollment numbers from this last year indicated, of course, the highest number of full-time online enrollments that we've ever experienced by a pretty large number. But with all of the expansion of online learning, there are actually some programs that are considering pausing programming this year because there's just not the interest that they may have thought, there was. And so we're kind of going through this period of like little bit of growing pains, like trying to figure out like what the future actually holds. So it's kind of an interesting time here in online education in Minnesota from the K-12 side.
Thanks so much for that update, Jeff. And I can provide us an update on Minnesota State. So there's been a lot of changes. It seems like this is the theme, right? We get to the fall and there's lots of changes in organizations. Here at the Minnesota State System Office, our former Senior Vice Chancellor, Ron Anderson, retired. And so we have a new Senior Vice Chancellor, Satasha Green Stevens, who was formerly an Associate Vice Chancellor in our Academic and Student Affairs Division here at the System Office. And so we're really excited about Satasha taking up the lead in Academic and Student Affairs here in Minnesota State. What that has meant, though, is for some of the units within our division, there are some changes that are occurring. And for those of you who have been part of the Commons for a while, you know that the unit Educational Innovations, the Minnesota State System Office, has been our unit, has been specifically tasked with the affiliation, the Minnesota Learning Commons. Some of the work that's going on in Educational Innovations is changing right now. Not that we're moving away from any of the work that we've historically done, because we're continuing to do that work, but we've had an ongoing initiative that we've called Next Gen here in Minnesota State, which is our movement away from our legacy system that has handled a lot of things like student records, enrollments, and other processes in the system, over to an enterprise technology, which some of you may be familiar with. It's called Workday. And so, as you can imagine, in a system the size of ours, a movement to a brand new enterprise software that's going to govern so many different kinds of functions in our system is a pretty monumental move. And in educational innovations, one of the things that I found to be kind of a feather in the cap of the work that we do is that under the new Senior Vice Chancellor, Kim Lynch, and everyone that works for Kim Lynch here at the system office has been asked to take a lead role in the rollout of Workday in the system. And so that's currently causing a little bit of reorganization in the work that many of us are doing here at the system office, but it's exciting too, because we know that the use of this brand new enterprise system is going to not only make functions and tasks within the system so much smoother and easier on our end, but we know it's going to translate into a lot of smoother things for our students as well. And so that is some of the news that's going on here at the system office. And in terms of other initiatives, things that we've shared in the past, we're still doing a lot of the same work that we've become known for doing, I think, in this group in the last several years, including work around open educational resources, Z degrees. We have a major federal grant right now to do open educational resources and teacher education. And we continue to move forward with a lot of our enterprise level educational development initiatives through our network of educational development, which has become an institution somewhat unto itself here in Minnesota State that we're really proud of. And so that's the update from the Minnesota State side. And I think with that, are there any questions that anyone has regarding some of the shares that we've just done from our organizations before we move on to our next agenda item?
Stephen, Mary, I'm wondering, I think that, Mary, we're listed next in terms of the 60-year, but perhaps that might be better situated before the presentation that Stephen and Jeff are going to be leading.
Yeah, I think that'd be appropriate, Bob. Are you suggesting we should hop down to our 2022 summit report?
That would be my recommendation, if that works for you, Mary.
Sure. Stephen, I just had one popcorn update too from Sourcewell, just to give people a save the date shout to our Impact Education Conference will be held again this year in person. It is primarily a K-12 conference, but all are welcome. And it will be January 7th, which is a Saturday. So to avoid some of the issues with substitute shortage. So we're going to host that on a Saturday in January. So I just put the link there in the agenda in case anyone's interested and wants to keep track or sign up later. We will be having that event. And Dave, yes, we are looking for event sponsors as well.
And my apologies, Mary, for trying to move on without providing you that opportunity. I'm going to be asking for a lot of grace here, I think, as I learn the ropes and how everything works here. But thank you.
No worries. I'm never shy about speaking up, Stephen, which you probably have noticed about me before.
And I appreciate it too.
No worries.
Mary, that conference on the 7th, would we say that the ancestor of that conference was kind of the old TIES conference in December?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep, and this is a smaller scaled version, but we were, with COVID and everything else, we've been trying to adapt and do an event that people can come to and make it accessible for everyone. So we're going to try this again in January.
Very good. Well, I want to welcome and acknowledge Eric to the meeting. So glad he could join us today. And Mary, do you want to hop into the 2022 Summit update report for us?
It will be fairly brief, but I just wanted to give an update. So for the summit, which we held on July 27th, it was from 8:30 to 12:30. I believe that was a Wednesday. We had over 300 registrations. I want to say registrations for the conference. I would say just in watching the sessions that I participated in and moderated, I would say we likely probably had about 100 people, maybe 120 people in live attendance. But we did publish quite widely that we would be recording all the sessions. And so I know some people, when you have conflicts and things, you're going to look forward to watching things later. But we had some wonderful, wonderful speakers and presentations on different topics. I wanted to just thank everyone who served on the planning committee with Bob and I to pull this together, and all of our presenters. And I have a link. I will put a link on the agenda there for the session schedule. And just note that I'm working now on dealing with all the videos to get them loaded up to YouTube, branded for the MnLC and loaded up to YouTube so that they can be watched at will. So that is going on. And the other thing that I want to mention just about this summit was I think we had just so many marvelous sessions on it, and we did have an evaluation that I sent out to everyone who registered. So if you have not completed that yet and you attended, I'd love it if you would. We do have a link in the agenda for that evaluation. And that's the extent of my report, unless you have some questions.
No, I think I can say that Mary and I, as we watched the people register and join, that we were very pleased at the fact that we got a fair amount more response than we were initially thinking. So that was great.
Yeah, and I just want to give a kudos to everyone who was involved with the orchestration of that event. I felt like it was pulled off really well. I personally did not experience any technological snafus or other things that might have occurred along the way. And so, yeah, kudos to everyone involved in orchestrating that event. Okay, Mary, would you like to provide us a webinar update next?
I certainly can. So I am in the process of building the webinar schedule for this year, and I have linked in the agenda there the schedule of dates. I am currently working at filling in the topics and presenters that I'm planning for. I will use, we'll talk more about the focus of our work, and Stephen and Bob and Jeff will talk more about the focus of our work for 22-23. So I will be trying to line up some presenters that align with the focus of what we're going to be talking about this academic year, as well as some of, I think, the popular topics that we had at the summit as well. So this is going to be a live document as I get things scheduled and get things set up with presenters. Just watch. This document is always linked on the agenda, by the way, at the bottom of the agenda. So, and these webinars, as I get them set up and established, will also go on the website. So you'll have plenty of information coming out about the webinars. They are an hour. We do them on Wednesday afternoon, on Wednesday afternoons from 3 to 4. And we do record all webinars as long as the presenters are okay with being recorded. And we do post all of those webinar recordings on the YouTube channel for the Learning Commons. So if you miss one, not a big deal, sign up anyway, and you'll get a chance to watch the recording. So watch for more on that schedule. I'll be working on that the next couple of weeks and hope to have that more or less filled out for the year. So, by the way, too, if you have a speaker that you would love to hear from, please get in touch with me and let me know. And I am more than happy to do the outreach to that person and get them signed up to speak to us. So just please feel free to communicate with me on that. And Stephen, we did have Kristen Lane join us from MCIS too.
Oh, very good. Kristen, welcome. Excuse me, welcome. So glad you could join us today.
Thank you. Sorry about being a little late.
Oh, no worries, no problem whatsoever. I think then we will be hopping back in time to our 240 item, which is the summary of the 2021-22 work. Bob and Mary, I think that you are set up to walk us through that.
We are. Bob, give me just a second. I'll share our slide deck. For your convenience too, I also have the link to this slideshow in the agenda too. So if you need to return to it at any point or want to share it with anybody else, please feel free. And so what Bob and I did was we wanted to provide an update to the group just as reminders, because we all have, as I think Bob put it, summer slide when we've been away from the Minnesota Learning Commons topics for a while for the summer and working on other things. So we wanted to just provide a refresher course, if you will, on all of the things that we talked about last year. And Bob, is the slideshow showing okay?
Yeah, looks good.
Okay. So as we all know, the Learning Commons is the partnership between the University of Minnesota, the Department of Education, and Minnesota State. We've been engaged in this work for a while. The official current version of the Learning Commons was created in 2009, but the history traces back to early efforts to coordinate around online learning as early as 1997. So, and I think I've been involved with it since almost nearly the beginning of it. And it has taken many, many variations over the years to get to where we are today. The mission of the Learning Commons, just as a reminder, is to promote high quality online blended digital learning and support educators teaching in these environments. And that's the real focus of our work. And we have this unique opportunity to connect with all of the partners in Minnesota's education system to be able to do that. And so it's just a really amazing partnership. And I'm just always so interested and excited about the things that we do. So what this last year, we studied the 60-year curriculum in depth. And Bob, I'm going to hand that one off to you to talk a little bit about.
Yeah, we can thank Steve and Senenge for this wonderful slide that they put together. I think the main thing that we were referencing in the 60-year curriculum, which is from a book, or at least by the same name. We had the two authors of this book present to us last year from Harvard University's Continuing Studies Unit. And it's kind of an extension of the idea of lifelong learning. And as indicated by this slide, it really is an aggregation of ideas around that notion, involving flexible education offerings and taking a look at the learner throughout their career and how that learner can deal with the changing economic situations, as well as looking at how technology is going to impact the world of work as well. And it's a notion that it's not just one and done, or it's not just you have a high school diploma or high school diploma plus a 2-year or 4-year degree, or even a professional degree, but it's learning throughout the lifetime given all the changes in the economy. Next slide, please, Mary. So if we take a look at some of the key concepts that we talked about in terms of what 60-year curriculum is referencing, one, we have a much greater human lifespan, and along with that, people are working longer. You know, instead of just retiring at 65, before we had mandatory retirement at 65, you know, people are now working to 70, 75, 80. Some people are doing that because they want to. Other people are doing that because they have to. But one way or another, educational institutions, we believe, And I think the authors of the book that we referenced believe really need to be in continual partnership with the learner. And it's not a matter of just having your degrees and then not seeing the educational institution except for maybe mandatory continuing ed every few years. So we also talked about the individual empowerment for career paths, and that we have the capability of looking at different types of learning paths. Many learners don't necessarily complete all at once. The number of what we used to call non-traditional college students who don't go to college immediately after high school is actually greater now than what we used to consider traditional path. So that is a significant development as well. Also, I think we looked at the importance of workforce and making sure that there was good interplay between our educational institutions and what's happening in the workforce, and that we try to be a little bit better at being responsive. Oftentimes, at least in higher ed, it can take years in order to launch a new program, and that certainly is not going to be adequate anymore when we're trying to respond to rapidly changing economic situations and learner demands. We also talked last year about artificial intelligence, the way that is integrating with a lot of learning opportunities and service opportunities. Certainly, if we take a look at what's happening at the University of Minnesota with programs like CogBooks that are responding to how the learner is going through content and then changing what learners are presented based on their responses. That's just one example on the academic side. We talked a lot about examples in terms of providing services to students and other assistance. And I think also in terms of the role of the 60-year curriculum with the emerging digital economy, it's extremely important that we have these type of capabilities. All right, Neri, I think you're up next.
Okay, so when we started our work last year, the MnLC always establishes a theme for the work for the year and some goals. And so our theme last year was basically the 6-year curriculum because we were intrigued by the ideas inherent in that publication. And so as our goals, you can read these for yourselves here, but we really were wanting to study the concepts of the 6-year curriculum, report and communicate some of this research regarding the current state of our education systems, as what types of things are going on right now that relate to the ideas in the 60-year curriculum, and to recruit and engage some other partners in our work that impact the work of higher education and K-12 education, such as, other areas of government, such as workforce development that Bob mentioned, nonprofits and foundation leaders. And then we also wanted to reflect and discuss and plan for how MnLC could coordinate some initiatives between our partners in support of some of these ideals, which actually ended up to be our research ended up being a very huge undertaking, and we have a lot of information gathered. So, but if you want to revisit the 21-22 MnLC goals, there's a link there for you to take you right to that document. They're also posted on the MnLC website. We also, as part of the 6-year curriculum, the authors of the articles around 6-year curriculum identified some needs for the pre-K-12 education system in terms of what they would see as the skills that students would need moving forward into their post-public education life, if you will, in terms of developing creativity, critical thinking, problem solving, communication, resilience, flexibility, that ability to continually reinvent yourself, along with their basic skills that they need to function in our society of literacy, numeracy, digital literacy, and global literacy. Also, kind of moving forward, looking into the future with the 60-year curriculum, we really want our students to be maybe more self-motivated or self-regulators than they have been in the past. We all know that in our school systems, we have kids that learn to do school really well. And when you shake things up into more personalized learning and project-based learning and so forth, sometimes that can be a struggle. So we want to make sure that those students have those self-regulation and motivation skills. And COVID also taught us that the students that were most successful with all of the distance learning and things that they were being put through for COVID were, of course, the ones that did maybe have a little bit of this self-regulation, motivational skill already inherent. And then looking at the idea, too, of students developing some entrepreneurship types of skills as they move forward into their post-public secondary school careers and moving ahead into whether they go to universities and colleges or trade schools, or they go right into work and pursue a different path, whatever that might be, just really encouraging that growth of ideas. And Bob, your turn.
Thank you so much. We don't want to go through every one of these things, but I do want to highlight a few. Student-centric focus, I think that's something that was very important that we talked about, looking really at what is it that the student needs and making it as easy as possible to support student needs, as opposed to what the supply side has to offer at our institutions, which may be what we've offered for quite a long time. But we want to make sure that we're really much more learner focused now as opposed to institutional focus. We certainly know that an important part in the higher ed area has to do with being able to have better student information, especially in terms of lifelong learning. We want to be able to track what students have completed in a broader manner. We'll talk about that in a minute, but also being able to provide the student with information like, we know that you have recently completed this short course or this non-credit type of educational opportunity. Did you know that these could be nested together and stackable to help you attain a further credential, which we don't do right now. We don't really have very well integrated systems, at least at the university. We have a separate system for non-credit and for credit, and we really can't necessarily identify when that student logs in that that's the same student who has taken part in both of these sets of opportunities. We can't do basic things that, recommender systems type stuff Amazon uses, where, you've taken this and you've taken that, you might be interested in this opportunity. And a lot of that has to do with back-end systems, such as constituent relationship management. Blockchain applications that track, register, and use learning assets. There's a lot of opportunities here that we're going to be talking about a little bit later, especially in terms of digital credentials. And diversity and inclusivity, something that we really tried to emphasize a lot last year. There's a great deal of these notions of having a more flexible, learner-focused for post-secondary education that also talks a lot about equity and access. If we are taking a look, for example, at what our colleagues at the University of Colorado are looking at, they're talking about performance-based admissions, where not only do you not need to have a ACT or an SAT, but you also could, for several degrees now, including one in engineering, take a series of courses initially, and if you perform well with a B or better, you are considered admitted. Because oftentimes we find students might have completed an undergraduate program, 10, 15 years ago, and they weren't exactly in a situation, they were super mature to complete a college education, but they've had a lot of experience in between, and we don't want to put up barriers if those students are very capable of continuing their education. So we really want to take a look at alternative methods of admission as well. Next slide, please. So just highlighting a few, I think we mentioned equity and inclusion, and that also brings up the issue of digital equity and broadband connectivity. We certainly learned during the pandemic that that's something that's becoming absolutely critical, but that's not always available, certainly in some areas because it's too expensive, but in other areas, especially in rural Minnesota, it might be because we just don't have that capacity because it was not built in that manner, and that those students are at a disadvantage. And that's something I think we've talked here in Learning Commons about the need to continually advocate. Workforce development, we've talked earlier about the need to be more responsive to what the needs are in the workforce. Maybe even taking a look at co-op programs where there's opportunities for both study as well as work. And then finally, taking a look at student-centered environments and flexible options. We've seen in the pandemic a lot of interest in HighFlex, where students have a great deal of choices in terms of delivery systems. Open educational resources, another topic of discussion, including Z degrees, where you could have an entire degree without students having to pay for curricular materials. And the Minnesota Partnership for Collaborative Curriculum. Next slide, please. Just continuing some of the other items I wanted to highlight, micro-credentials and badging. That's becoming increasingly important. We had presentations on that last year. An example from the graduate school at the University of Minnesota, where we're talking about very rigorous methods of measuring attainment. So it's not just a matter of getting a badge for being in your seat and completing a series of web pages, but that you're actually evaluated on the basis of assignments. The importance of information digital literacy. We already talked, we hadn't talked necessarily about open pedagogy, which is related to open educational resources, but certainly the notion of students participating in the design of courses as well. And then finally, universal student records. We've talked about the comprehensive learner record to record things other than just the academic experiences that students have, covering everything from work opportunities to volunteer opportunities, and making sure that all of that is tracked along with things like credit for prior learning. So I think that's probably enough given where we are in the time. Mary, I'm going to turn over to you for our webinars from last year.
Yep, so I will quickly as part of just the summary for working here from our work for last year, we had numerous webinars on all of these different topics related to the 6-year curriculum. All those recordings are available on the MnLC YouTube channel. We also had 3 special interest groups operating. Innovation, which was chaired by Stephen Kelly and Dave Paschke. Faculty Development and Quality of Online Courses, chaired by Dr. Kristen Carlson. And then Open Education, which was chaired by Grace Atkins. And those groups throughout the year meet and hear about different resources and activities going on in all of these areas so that we can network and exchange information. And then, Bob, this one is you, the annual report.
Right, we completed the annual report for the previous year. We're going to be working on the new one soon. some really interesting things, obviously, in the pandemic in terms of increase in the number of students who were enrolled in online learning. I think we'll just leave that link in for you. And Mary, I'm trying to remember if that's up on the website or not quite yet.
It is. It should be.
Okay. So
If I'm not remembering that I put it up, I'll double check.
Excellent. So you look at the MnLC website on that, but it's a pretty good compendium of what we did and also what's happening in the state. So certainly encourage you to turn your attention to that. And I think we just have some final slides to finish up, Mary.
Yes, we did. This is just, I already talked about the summit. So this is where I have the link to the program and schedule for all of the topics that we had at the summit. So the summit was another big part of our work this last year. We also have linked here just some additional resources. If you want to do some further reading on the 6-year curriculum, which got us going on all of this last year, here are some additional materials for you. And then, as I say, when I read to my little grandnephews and nieces, the end.
Very good. So hopefully that's a lead into Stephen, what you and Jeff have been spearheading, which is, okay, you know what we've done last year, but how are we going to build on that and, continue our effort to focus more on some very specific things that we're able to act on for this year?
Sounds like the segue into the Jeff and Stephen show, Bob. Is that right?
That is very right.
With a special appearance by Bob, I think, as a matter of fact. Mary, did you want to share the slide deck that we created?
Yeah. Let me just unshare that one and share this one. Give me just 1 second, Stephen.
No worries at all.
Here. There we go.
Looks like we are seeing my collections, Toby, right now on the screen, Mary.
Sorry. Okay, it did something weird. Give me just a second here. I'm seeing what I'm supposed to see, but you are not. So just
you probably have 40 tabs open like I do or something of that nature.
Yeah, that tends to be a terrible practice that I have. So let's see. Let me try this again. I'm going to do it this way first and see.
It's like we're still seeing. Oh,
Yep,
oh, there we go. There we go.
Did it come? Okay.
Yep. Now we're seeing it. Yes.
All right. Now I'll switch it to present mode for you so people can see it better. Is it still the way it should be?
It looks terrific.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Well, let's hop into our new theme for this year. And I think rather than spending time on this slide, Mary, we can just hop to the next slide in the deck, and that can get us started in talking about how we landed on the theme for this year's MnLC. So what we're looking at on the screen right now is actually a presentation slide that Senenge and I shared where we did some opening remarks at this past year's summit. But this actually well informs some of the theme direction that we've decided to go with in this year's MnLC. So we're looking at some of the items that were on a previous slide that Bob shared in the last presentation that look at the key themes that kind of came out of our exploration of the 60-year curriculum last year. Some of these themes include, again, longer-term relationships with students, flexible and interchangeable academic pathways. I won't read all of these, you can read them yourselves, but as we reflected upon the things that we learned last year in the 60-year curriculum, and we thought to ourselves, well, given the time and the resources that we have, which are finite, and we know we can't do everything that's involved in the 60-year curriculum, what kind of things could we focus on where all of our organizations, including Minnesota State, the University of Minnesota, and the Minnesota Department of Education, where we have some expertise and a place that we can start from, so that we're not trying necessarily to build something brand new off the ground, but we're playing off our strengths and we're doing something where we feel that we can maybe get the most out of the effort that we can put into it in this academic year. And after we thought about all of this, when we thought about these themes and we asked ourselves, what lends itself well to the eight items that we are looking at on the screen, we landed with, going to our next slide, Mary, our theme of the whole learner recognizing a lifetime of learning. And what is this theme? What does it entail? What's involved in it? What we decided was thinking about digital credentials and about how they can impact the future of education, not just in higher education, but K-12 education, and indeed education that extends beyond the university into, say, the workplace and a person's lifelong learning, and even in educational spaces that they might pursue through their own agency, maybe through a company, maybe through the internet, maybe through some other kind of organization in the future that we can't even imagine what it would look like. What stitches all of these things together? And digital credentials seem to be a good place to land that would address the 8 things on the last slide. And so for this year's Minnesota Learning Commons, we sort of divided the work into 2 different areas that we thought would serve all of our members the best and kind of get us as a group to a place where we might be able to demonstrate something at the end of this year that we can take to our organizations as being indicative of how the work could proceed in the future in line with what the 60-year curriculum has taught us. And so the first thing that we decided we wanted to try to accomplish this year was just looking at education around digital credentials and around the ecosystem that supports it. Because one of the things that we've acknowledged in our organizations is that people talk about things like micro-credentialing, digital badges, and the like very often, but there aren't too many folks that seem to have a strong understanding of exactly what the functions, the processes, and everything that's entailed and wraps around these digital credentials, how they operate, and what they look like. And so we asked ourselves questions like, well, what constitutes a digital credential? Who controls the privacy of digital credentials? Who maintains the records? How do they get transferred from one organization to another? Do they go poof and disappear at any point in time? Or are they truly evergreen and they're always there from the time the person earns them to the time when the person may no longer need them? On that note, can a person discard their own digital credential at any time once it's created? All of these were questions that we asked, and we said, do we know the answers to them? In some cases, we thought, well, we kind of do, but in other cases, it wasn't so clear that we did know the answer to those. And so looking at education in our group this year and diving into digital credentials, we're hoping to answer a lot of these questions, and in fact, more of these questions. And this is where we're going to be looking to all of you and the MnLC more broadly to provide some of the questions that we want to try to get at as we develop our own educational plans this year. A lot of this ties back to the webinars. Earlier on, Mary mentioned that if you know of folks who know something about, in this case, digital credentialing or something that wraps around digital credentialing, and you'd like to invite them to share with our group to help us answer some of the questions we might have about how this all works, refer them to Mary. We definitely want to connect up with them, and we definitely want to invite them in to share their work and share their experience with all of us. So that's part 1. Part 2, and this is the part that gets us really excited and is in alignment with the actual work plan we set out last year at the beginning of our 2-year plan for the 60-year curriculum. That was the creation of piloting some work that would kind of dovetail into 60-year curriculum work. So what we devised was this idea to put together, maybe 3, maybe 4 pilot groups this year, groups of members in MnLC that would specifically tackle one area of digital credentialing and basically create a pilot project that could be implemented in a very small form, in theory at least, in the next academic year, but maybe actually in practice. We just don't know how that's all going to work out. But what we do know is we want to not just do some theory and some knowledge-based work around digital credentialing. We actually want to develop a way whereby we can all get our hands a little bit into digital credentialing directly. So if, for instance, you have never worked directly with a digital badging software like Credly, let's just put that out there, we wanted to create the opportunity where you could get that experience. You could get hands-on with it. You might create your own badge. You might issue your own badge to someone along the way. Those are some of the places that we want to go with this pilot work. And so now that we've covered just those 2 items that we'd like to make sure we attend to this year, I'm going to pass the mic off to Jeff and explain to us a little bit more about why digital credentialing makes a lot of sense in the way we're setting it up. So next slide, please.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for setting me up so well to go a little bit deeper here about why we think digital credentials are the right thing for the MnLC to tackle right now. So first and foremost, we recognize that our current systems for recognizing learning are woefully limited, right? They are typically very opaque in that we can't easily tell what they mean. It might be related to something like a credit for a course that has a title, or a grade even assigned to a course that has a title, but you have no idea what was in the course, first of all, what the student actually took away from it in terms of skills or knowledge or understanding, and maybe the grade that they earned is even less indicative of actually what they actually took away from it. So we recognize that the way that we currently talk about learning is really limiting, and it's limiting to students. And we actually know, kind of related to the equity, diversity, and inclusion piece that is so centered in our work at MnLC and in our own institutions, that oftentimes the folks that end up on the wrong side of this are punished for factors other than actually demonstrating learning. So this is an important piece for us to recognize, and a place to start. So rather than saying that we want to tear these things down, like we want to get rid of grades and course titles and things like that, the way that we are thinking about this and talking about it is that we really want to expand. We want to expand what's possible, and recognizing that grades, course titles, credits, degrees, all of those things aren't going to go away in our lifetime or maybe ever, but we can augment those records with a more rich way of recognizing people's skills, knowledge, and experiences. We also think that digital credentials, we recognize, are aligned with existing work and energy that is happening on our campuses already. Throughout my time on the MnLC, I've seen a badging presentation every single year at the summit, going all the way back to my first one when I was here in 2016. So this is not new work. This is aligned with existing work and initiatives that we all have going on in our partner institutions. And because of that, we also have some knowledge base, and we have some active examples. And the thing that really energizes me here is that I think, these projects that Stephen introduced as our second, action, the first being education, the second being these demonstration projects, shouldn't be that difficult to build, because we're not starting from zero, right? We already have, examples to build upon, and maybe just expand a little bit or refine or develop currency for. We also know that digital credentials can enable the kind of lifelong and flexible learning that was talked about in the 60-year curriculum. It is not confined to a particular institution. It's not something that you carry with you through one system and then you switch to another system. It's something that is a building holistic record, kind of this comprehensive record of learning concept. And lastly, we think it has tremendous opportunity for impact. So this one thing could really transform the way that our learners experience education, opportunities, and access that people have. So for those reasons, we're pretty excited. Mary, can you please advance to the next slide? So, we're using the term digital credentials, and I want to just get us all on the same page of what we mean when we talk about digital credentials, first of all. So when we say digital credentials, we're really referring to representations of achievements that can be awarded, collected, and shared digitally. Okay, so that's really what this is about. We might know these things by several different names. They can be credentials or certificates. That's kind of an umbrella term that represents the achievements that can be awarded by a third party oftentimes, or an education institution. They're aligned with competencies that are probably already developed and defined, and are achievements of knowledge or skills that are demonstrated and verified. Credentials and certificates are often recognized too by career field or specific industries. That means they have built-in currency already. Micro-credentials represent smaller, more specific achievements, but these things are stackable, right? So the stackable concept is that many of these achievements can be combined and added up to a full credential or a recognized certification. Badges we refer to are digital representations of an accomplishment that are secure and verifiable. And assertions, then, I think are the broadest of all of these. And these are examples of skill, knowledge, or experience and competencies added by the owner, as in self-assertions, or maybe by another person, organization, or institution. And the evidence behind these, which is actually contained in the data behind the credential, is really what adds the validity. It's the person demonstrating that they actually can do this thing. And so those are some of the terms that we kind of see. Just a few concepts about this that I think are important for us to keep in mind. When we talk about these systems, interoperability is essential. So if this is going to work like we think it is and hope it is, we need to have interoperability between individual institutions within a system, between systems, between education and employment, right? And all of those kinds of things. So it's important that I think, we're going to put forward the position as MnLC that if we do work on these things, that any development follows the open standards that are established for digital credentials already. We don't want folks developing things in a silo that only work while the student is in their institution and maybe behind a paywall for them to get access to it. We also believe in learner ownership, that this is an important concept with digital credentials, that it takes sort of the power, it shifts the power balance from more on institutions to more on learners, where the learners can collect, share, and curate their own credentials as they will. And the most important thing that I will probably talk about several more times this year is this idea of these things are all great. Starting a badging program is awesome, but if nobody really cares about the badge that's earned or issued, it doesn't go anywhere. And several of you who have maybe been involved in badging before, or you've earned badges yourselves, will know that, right? So something, we really need to focus on here, and I would suggest for some of these project ideas, is the meaning, relevance, and real currency, the worth of some of these credentials. So actually developing agreements with folks that are involved here. And I'll explain that a little bit more on the next slide. And so some of the opportunities that, are kind of front of mind for us, and Stephen and Senenge and Mary and I had an opportunity to meet and really got energized when we started thinking about what these things could mean to solve some of the problems that we know exist. And one is these opportunities to get more folks moving along and supporting folks moving along a career pathway. And when I talk about career pathway, I'm not excluding the idea of a liberal arts education. I myself am a product of a liberal arts education, and I'm very much a believer in that. But a career pathway includes the combination of education and supportive services that support a person as they enter and advance through a particular career field, and now more often than not in between career fields as they transition. So, examples here could include starting narrow with an identified need for a particular career field, identifying competencies and development opportunities along the way, and then supporting those opportunities. We see opportunity in the ways that we recognize skills, knowledge, and experience. Stephen and I believe Bob has also brought up this concept of credit for prior learning. I think something that often makes us uneasy about awarding credit for prior learning is like, do we really know if they've learned it? Like, how can we trust that? And I think that digital credentials have the potential to add that level of trust and verifiability because you can actually drill down to the example, right? So that might be something that is a potential opportunity that we see. Another thing is supporting transitions, right? So Bob provided this great example about changing admissions, but we can also think about transitions in terms of supporting students while they're in our systems and when they go between systems. For example, when an employer hires an employee, you want to both maximize the things that they are excellent at, and to know that you need data about those things that they've demonstrated they can do. And you want to pinpoint your development of that person toward those things that you think that they might need a little bit more on in order to work well within the job they're hired to do within your organization. And we can think about that with learners as well, right? Like the more, I think the CRM example is an excellent one that Bob referenced. If we have like data, it can be used to really pinpoint support and development of folks and to really keep them engaged in our institutions and link them with other folks who are thinking similarly. Lastly, I'll say, you know, one of the difficult things is often, you know, these articulation agreements or agreements between high school and college about dual credit or all of those kinds of things. We think digital credentials really have the opportunity to make those, to smooth the path for some of those agreements, in that they can maybe get at a specified and agreed to like level description of competencies, right? And so when we're no longer talking about like big course level types of ideas and we get down to the actual skills and competencies and knowledge that folks have and can gain and demonstrate, then it might be a little bit easier to make some of these agreements more actionable. And I welcome Bob and Stephen to add anything to you know, these descriptions of project opportunities.
Yeah, no, I think you did a great job, Jeff, putting the case out here. Digital credentials is sort of a concrete organizing principles, and I think the way that the two of you have described it is it's really an ecosystem around that, so that all of these issues, articulation agreements, supporting transitions, credit for prior learning, career pathways, informing the workforce, you've really, I think, done a great job of taking a lot of the elements we discussed last year, but putting them into something that is a related structure, and ideally something that we could try some pilot projects on across our systems.
And Mary, with that, I think you can go to the next slide. I'm not sure who I'm handing off to here. Stephen, is it you again?
Yeah, I can take it from you, Jeff. That's fine. So we're interested in getting some feedback from the group on the call today. These are our initial thoughts on our direction and theme for this year. Just curious about reactions you might have, suggestions you might have about the direction, alterations of the directions you might have. Feel free to put those into the chat. Otherwise, I would also invite members on the call today just to enable your microphone and chime on in.
This is Pete here. I really appreciate the obvious amount of comprehension and thought that went into your presentation and your selection of topics. I think they all have a lot of forward movement in terms of inertia and in terms of their scope and impact. And it's the kind of thing that I think an organization such as this should be leading on. If we look at the dynamics and change that we're going to see in higher ed, as predicted by a lot of people over the next 5 or 6 years, breaking the spatial and chronological uh, tradition of engagement with a singular institution is going to be significant. So a number of the topics you spoke about uh, have a lot of implication for people who are going to have more of a cafeteria approach to their higher education, or a lifelong learner who is dipping in and out of different modalities and institutions and uh, credentialing and credit. So I think there's a good alignment, and I really am kind of excited about also higher impact things for underrepresented populations who don't have the time or means to take a consecutive 4 semester program, and returning adult professionals who may have just want to clean up and finish up a degree that they started prior. Returning service members and veterans who don't really have good articulation and experiential transcript abilities with our institutions in particular. So, I mean, all of these things are germane and present in terms of what I see an organization such as this should be working on.
I think that's a really good point, Peter. I was just looking in that category of some college, no degree, which is sort of a category people have been talking about. And supposedly it's somewhere between 35 and 40 million people in that category. And I think there's, as we're seeing the demographic cliff of 2025, which is something we've talked about last year, meaning the number of people in the high school pipeline that are, or the folks who aren't there, that's going to provide a big gap for our higher ed. Why not be able to use our higher ed resources to educate people who have started college, but maybe through various situations have not been able to complete? That's that emphasis on lifelong learning that we've been talking about as well.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing all those ideas, Peter, and the follow up there too, Bob. Would anybody else like to chime in with some thoughts or comments?
One thing that just kind of popped into my head was thinking about the university's extension programs. And when people say they're a master gardener, that's more impressive to people than I say I have a master's degree. I'll be honest, people really respect that. And so it's kind of like, how do you get a brand like that people will recognize and respect? And that's just the example that pops to my head. Is the Master Gardener program is nationally very well respected. If you can say you have that credential, it just seems to mean a lot to folks.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I can say, Eric, having spent 20 years with our U of M extension and working on some Master Gardener stuff, I hadn't thought of it that way before, but you're absolutely right. It does carry a lot of weight to it. And I think that's an example of what can be done in terms of, non-credit credentials. The other thing the Master Gardener program had offered, at least in the past, is both a non-credit and a credit option. So some folks, so it's also an example of a potential, nested credential that at least in the past certainly could have been used for those who want to, continue their education. So that's a great example that I hadn't thought about before.
Bob, you mentioned credit, non-credit, and it just gets me thinking about how the idea of digital credentials, in my mind, starts to blur credit, non-credit. I mean, if you receive a digital credential for something that you've accomplished or for a skill that you've exhibited or a competency that you've shown, you're receiving some kind of credit. I mean, you're receiving something that shows that you know how to do that. In higher ed in particular, we use these ideas of credit and non-credit, but as the rest of the world begins to ingest, if I can use that term, all these different kinds of credentials, I think in the world outside of higher education, the idea of credit or non-credit continues to become increasingly skewed. And the last thing I might say is, Jeff, I don't know if you had left a call yesterday that we were on, but I know Bob was there, but I had mentioned, if I go over to my wall and I take my bachelor's degree that's hanging up there off of my wall from the University of Minnesota, and I go out back and I throw it in my bonfire and I burn it, that doesn't destroy the fact that I have a bachelor's degree. It is housed up there digitally somewhere at the U in this case. And all these credentials that we have been providing these days are already digitized. And what does that mean in light of how we look at digital credentials and what we think we're doing and what we're actually doing?
I think this is a great topic for us to have some common practices around, and that common learning helps build those common practice. At the same time, this topic presents a great challenge to make sure the right people are in some of these sessions, because full disclosure, this group is not the right people. It's involving, like the registrar style pieces, the continuing studies style pieces, to also take this as that learning opportunity, to take this as that ability to think differently around some very traditional practices, because higher education and K-12 education is very old. We still operate in very old ways. So I think that really being mindful about who we want to engage in this is important, which also includes the speakers and what speakers we invite in and what positions they hold. Mary, I already emailed you one speaker who would be fantastic, and they're actually housed in the registration office at UC Boulder. So like it's just the different perspectives there.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, Dave, that we want to be successful, and that was one of the questions that I think we were thinking about is, who do we need at the table in order to succeed? Who's not here already? Obviously we also need workforce people here as well. I know I've worked with a lot of the registrars, and boy, that's just a ton of effort in order to make those things work.
Stephen, maybe this is a good time. Oh, sorry, Peter.
Oh, Jeff, go right ahead. I'll just had a comment to chime in a little bit later.
I was just gonna say, Stephen, I think you have some projects to tell us about, right? Like how this might go yet? I'm just doing a time check.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that, Jeff. I do have a few final slides to share with everyone and a call to action that's actually in there as well. And so maybe we can hop over to those. I will move through them expeditiously. And then for anyone that would like to hang out and discuss this for a little longer, we can do that. We can hang out. Mary, can you pull the presentation back up again, please? Okay, and I'm seeing Toby again. Oh, there we go. And Lisa, I see your question there in the chat. And I think what you're asking is, do we have a pre-established call to invite folks into to talk to them about this? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I'm asking if there's some kind of summary that we could share.
To my mind, we don't have a summary yet, but we're in the process of creating some materials to help support this work. So that's certainly something that we can incorporate into that. And so talking a bit about the project demonstrations, Okay, here we go, the work group participation. So we talked a bit about education and the pilot demonstrations that we want to work on this year. We can move to the next slide. Again, we're going to move through these expeditiously. Bob actually had some sophisticated thinking around the education projects. If we go to the next slide, please. Bob, would you care to maybe give the 30-second explanation of what you have in mind for the education project, if that's possible?
Yeah, Dave, this I think kind of follows up what you were talking about as well, is that there are some key stakeholders here that we need to reach with different, with messaging that's specifically configured to them. Might be workforce people, might be registrars, other folks, instructors, faculty. So we need to be able to think about that in terms of the type of educational programming we want to provide in this area to explain this concept. What are the messages, how we split the audiences up, and what's the best way to reach people through which channels, whether it's webinars or materials that we create, fact sheets, etc. But we definitely have a lot of education we probably need to do in order to get people on board. So this could be considered as part of its own project, or it could be considered in conjunction with the pilots, I think, Stephen, as you were suggesting. So it could go either way. That's all I'll say about the need to educate people about this.
And if we could move to the next slide, Mary. And this is what I wanted to focus on with Dave's comments, because I was hoping to mention the exact same thing here. So Dave, thanks so much for putting it so eloquently earlier on and giving us those examples of folks that we need to connect with. These pilot groups, what we're envisioning is that we would have a leader who would step forward that would have a great idea for an excellent pilot project focused on digital credentialing. But once that leader steps forward, they may or may not be aware of the right kind of folks they need to have on their team to actually carry the pilot out. And so those would be anywhere from maybe 2 to 5 extra participants. Compositionally, pilot groups would have a maximum of maybe 6 people, but that's not really a hard maximum. I mean, if there was a reason to have 7 or 8, I think we would certainly encourage that. A lot of that will be, I think, left up to the lead and some of the members of the group and figuring out compositionally, again, who needs to be part in order to best ensure success. And we're going to be providing for those leads who step forward a template that basically has a list of questions that helps you to better lay out what your idea is and start thinking about some of the factors that need to be incorporated into that work. One of those being, once again, who needs to be at the table? Other questions that you might consider is, which organizations would this be relevant to? What is the current problem that this particular kind of pilot solution would help to solve? These are the kinds of things that will be incorporated into this template to help the lead kind of quickly sketch out exactly what this is. At that point, once that's sketched up, you actually have a document that you can share with potential members to help them better understand what kind of work they would be a part of. So you can then approach people and say, I really could use someone with your experience and background. Here's basically the sketch of what this project is going to be. Does this look like something you'd be interested in doing? And so those are some of the tools that we're going to help provide to the leads who would step forward and want to do one of these projects. To the next slide, please, Mary. And so just getting back to what Jeff shared a little bit ago, I mean, some potential projects in a very broad sense could be a pilot project that looks at digital credentialing to support job attainment. It could be a project that supports the translation of skills, knowledge into a credit for prior learning situation. So maybe it's something that you attain in high school that you can take with you to the community college, and it can be recognized for credit for prior learning. You could have a project that supports the transition from high school to college in some way. So one of the things I've talked about in some of our small groups is how many of our institutions in Minnesota State are looking at more multiple measure approaches to college admissions and eventual placement in first year experience or other courses that they have on campus. Again, digital credentials could be a helpful measure for conducting some of that work at our institutions. And to the next slide, Mary. Try to remember. This is the final slide, I think. And so again, if you're interested in participating in one of these groups, we'd love to hear from you today. I know that Mary has a sign-up sheet that she put together. She can share that in the chat. So if you may not be the kind of person that has a lead idea right now, but maybe you know that you definitely like to be a part of something, we welcome your name. If you do have a great idea, a big idea, and you'd like to lead one of these pilot groups, we definitely want to hear from you. Please sign up on the sheet. We can connect individually or collectively and have a conversation about it. And again, in any event, we'll have that template that will be coming out very soon, and we'd be sure to send that your way so that you could complete it and then bring it back to the group. Now, truth be told, we haven't figured out exactly what our process is going to be. If we get, for instance, deluged with 24 different pilot ideas, right now we're thinking 3 or 4 is ambitious enough, but all of that is something that we're going to be working on here in the coming weeks. Sometimes people say that they're building a plane while they're flying. We're not really doing that, but we are kind of building the plane as we're headed down the runway. So that's kind of where the work is at right now, moving into the fall semester and the new school year. And I guess it's 4:01. For those of you who have to leave today, thank you for attending. For those of you who might have some final questions, I can stick around for a couple more minutes. Jeff, are you able to stick around for a couple more minutes too?
Yeah, I can stay for 5 or 10 minutes. Yeah.
Okay. So we will do that. Otherwise, for those of you who need to go, thank you for attending today. And we'll look forward to seeing you at the next MnLC meeting. And for anyone remaining, questions, comments, feel free to chime in.
I just thought of one comment, and our cousin state agency, Department of Employment and Economic Development, the DEED folk, have done scholarly and institutional research on the relationship and measuring alignment between post-secondary graduation and post-secondary education and employment and job opportunities. They've got a lot of data analytics. They also engage with both of our systems, continuing ed and customized training, with formal funded workforce development programs. I can think of at least a dozen of them in MnState, and I know the U also has such a thing. So I would probably like to work on a relationship with somebody from DEED who could be a contact or a touchstone with that agency to bring to bear some of their knowledge and resources in this matter.
Hey, Bob, didn't you talk about connecting with DEED? I thought that was one of the things that you wanted to do.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with you, Peter, that DEED is a critical partner. I'm in a group that they are engaged in that's talking about how we judge quality credentials, especially in the non-credit area. So I'm thinking maybe somebody from that group might be appropriate to join us here, but they'd be very, very important. And certainly we heard from others about the criticality of, looking at folks who are involved in higher ed at the registrar's offices and some of those other folks. That might be something we want to do, is to kind of start building a list of folks we need to include in order to make this successful. And as you saw, Mary put in the chat a call to action statement that she drafted around this area that could be, revised according to need to try to recruit people. But we definitely need, I think, a conscious strategy to bring the right additional people to the table.
And I guess I would be remiss to not try to personally engage with our tribal economic development and tribal career development pathway programs that are in the state with our bands of Ojibwe and Sioux.
Mm-hmm.
So Lisa has.
Yeah, I should probably get offline pretty soon, but I just, I think I want to propose myself as a project lead. And I told Jeff I was waiting for the form, meaning the one that Mary just posted the link to. So is that the place that I should do that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Peter, I was thinking too, just as you were talking about the tribal connection, I mean, if there is a pilot project that you can envision that would specifically incorporate folks from those communities into the work, that's a project I would be very interested in seeing pulled off. No doubt about it.
Yeah, so I think it's one of the reasons I moved over here. It's kind of my personal orientation and mission on this, especially the engagement of technology and online with the episteme of like what we're doing in education and enhancing people's lives. So I would be definitely in there. I grabbed the link. I have to run for the hills right now, but I will definitely circle back around on this.
Thanks so much, Peter. Have a good
That'd be
afternoon.
great.
This is really exciting. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah, thank you, Elisa. I'm glad that you think so. We're excited about it too. It seemed like a really logical direction for us and our 3 organizations to go. And 4, including Sourcewell. By the way, Mary, I'm going to get used to that. 4 organizations. Got to include Sourcewell there. And as Bob indicated, I think we're tapping into some strengths that we already have. And I think that's important because we only have 12 months in a cycle. Granted, we could continue the work on to the next year, I imagine, Bob, but we want to have some lofty goals, and we want to try to do as much as we can this year.
Yeah, and that gets to what can we accomplish, or at least begin to accomplish this year? What's doable? What is concrete? And it's the right size for us to be able to have an impact.
Yeah. Well, thank you, everyone, for your
Thank you.
time today and for your thoughtful suggestions and input and feedback you've brought to today's meeting. Until we all meet again.
Bye.
Take
We'll
care.
be in touch.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.